Hey, it's Jeff. Your tabletop technician. On the dice tower. Oh, oh, oh. Whew. Okay, as I try to collect my bearings, I'm going to show you this curiously illustrated and questionably titled game out of Germany, Deckchairs on the Titanic. Designed by Tom Holness, this mostly abstract game fits into a category that I like to call chaos games. These are games where everyone is working in a common environment and the game state of that environment can change wildly from turn to turn. These probably fit in a fairly broad category known as Ameritrash games, but they tend to be highly interactive and can be frustrating for players who are a bit more results oriented. But before I get into all that, let's get into the gameplay. In this box are 6 boards, 3 of which are used for each playthrough. The stern of the ship holds your victory point tracker. The bow of the ship holds direction cards for each round, which I'll cover in a moment. In the middle is the actual play area. There are a few different boards that you can use for each player count. I have a 4-player board here on the table, but there are 2 more available out of the box. You'll use these to help you set up the board you choose to play on. Now, before I get into that, you also have this small deck of direction cards, a variety of small wooden lounge chairs, and some of the tiniest meeples I think I've ever seen. You also, perhaps awkwardly, have an iceberg eeple. So for setup, let me try to explain using a little video magic. If I overlay 2 of the boards for a 4-player game, you can see where the empty spaces on one board are filled with icons from another board. The icons don't matter, only the color, so you'll place a deck chair of the appropriate color on an empty space based on the color shown on that space on the empty board. You'll also place that ice beeple in the middle of the board, and then you'll select a number of direction cards based on the number of players and the length of game desired. You'll also add to that stack the direction card with no direction needle. This stack goes face down onto the front of the ship. The starting card goes 2 spaces away and indicates the current round, and the next card is revealed in the middle spot. Each round of the game consists of players taking a number of actions, 1 at a time, again based on the number of players. 2 players will get 4 actions each, 3 and 4 players, 3 actions each. On their turn, a player can take 1 of 3 possible actions. 1, they can move one of their own chairs 1 space in a straight line, not moving diagonally. Their movement can't push another chair or the iceberg token. 2, they can place their meeple, representing an attendant, onto any space on the board that is empty or already contains one of their chairs. As an exception, no player can place their meeple in the center space of the board. Now, 3rd, a player can move the iceberg itself, and this uses a little bit of a momentum mechanism. First, the iceberg can be moved in any direction, including diagonals, any number of spaces. If it hits a space with a chair, the token will stop in that space, but then the chair will move the same number of spaces the ice did, unless it too hits another chair. In this case, the chain reaction continues until something strikes the edge of the board or until an attendant gets in the way. That's right, these meeples are in fact capable of incredible feats of strength. You see, an attendant reserves a spot it's standing on for a chair of its own color, which means a chair of the wrong color cannot occupy that space even if it's shoved in that direction by a giant ice block at an incredible rate of speed. Now, if instead a chair of the correct color lands on a space of its own attendant, the attendant grabs onto it and holds it there until the end of the round. Once each player has taken the appropriate number of actions, which can be tracked on this chart, the ship rocks. The direction of the movement is indicated by the current round card. In the first round of the game, the ship doesn't move, but starting with the second round, the ship will rock in one of the 8 ordinal or cardinal directions. And when this happens, every chair on the board not held down by one of its attendants will move 1 space in the direction of the arrow on the round card. That is, unless it hits the edge of the board, the iceberg, or an attendant of a different color. After movement, the round is scored. A chair on an empty space gets nothing, a chair on a marked space of a different color gets 1 point, a chair on a space matching its own color gets 2 points, and a chair on the coveted center space of the board gets 4 points. You then slide the next round card, which you've had a chance to think about already, over top of the current round card and reveal the next round's card if there is one. Each round proceeds the same until the last round is scored and the highest score wins. Okay, first of all, let me talk about the theme here real quick. This may make some folks a little uncomfortable. In fact, when I first suggested playing this to a couple that was coming to join us for dinner, one of them was solidly against playing this game until I explained that it had nothing to do with the Titanic, and we were simply moving chairs around a board. It doesn't help, though, that even on the description of this game on BGG, it says, "Deck chair attendants compete to earn tips from happy customers whilst the ship sinks." I don't know, to me that's kind of in bad taste, but it belies the cutesiness of this game because besides the title, this little iceberg, and these guys standing at the bow of the ship, there's nothing else really relevant to the Titanic in this game. I have to wonder if a title such as Deck Chairs on a Cruise Ship might have done this game and its Kickstarter campaign some favors, especially considering that it's a very lightweight little puzzle game with tons of player interaction. Yes, feelings will get hurt a little when someone uses the ice block to careen your chair away from some prized points. Or maybe they'll place their attendant in a space that'll take you far too many turns to get around, leaving you to scramble to make up points somewhere else. In fact, that might be my biggest criticism of the game. The short game actually feels a bit too short, but even more so, the number of actions available to players, especially at 3 or 4 players, makes it very hard to recover from some targeted actions. In my last play of this, I went from having 8 points ready to score down to exactly 0 after just 2 of those 3 turns, and not only that, I couldn't do anything to pick up just 1 point in that last action. I'm not saying this wouldn't potentially be worse if players had more actions available, but in general we just felt hamstrung by the general brevity of the game. And I think one reason for that too is the fact that you can't move your deck chairs in the diagonal direction. The difference in needing 4 actions to get around an obstruction when 2 could easily suffice was certainly a source of frustration. And speaking of frustration, trying to handle these little meeples is a challenge for any hand over the age of 25 or so. And even these deck chairs are pretty tiny. And I'm not really sure why, because there's a ton of wasted real estate across these 3 boards, and 2 of these aren't really even needed. Don't get me wrong, I don't have any problem with representing a giant ship on my game table, but the difference in scale between these boards and these tiny little components just doesn't make any sense. Not to mention, with these giant boards, the MS Paint quality of the art becomes glaringly obvious. These random chaos games really aren't my kind of thing, but I do have a couple of them. If they're quick, maybe a bit silly, or have interesting gameplay, they can be nice games to play after dinner with some light or non-gaming friends, and I think that this one mostly fits that bill. It's not a game that I'm ever really going to seek out to play, but with the right group, it's not too much of a stinker. Cheers. On the dice tower! Ow, ow, ow! Part of that was real. You're damn it, Tom! Jesus! Tom, we're going to talk about my insurance. Almost died. Almost.